is that I don't want to be involved in the stuff where it's negative stuff.
Hi, how do you do?
I need to talk to him.
Oh, okay, sorry.
2 weeks ago, I'm outside my office. My assistant comes up and says, Suge Knight wants to speak to you from jail. I said, who? He said, Suge Knight. The Suge? Yes. Gotta be kidding me. No.
In the most explosive twist yet, the federal trial of Sean Diddy Combs took an unexpected turn that has left the courtroom and the entire music world reeling. Like something out of a Hollywood thriller, the already tense proceedings were thrown into chaos when Marion Suge Knight, the incarcerated titan of DRR, appeared on a flickering video screen prepared to make the kind of allegations that could reshape the narrative of hip-hop history forever. Even through the grainy feed, Knight's presence commanded the room, his cold, deliberate tone slicing through the tension like a blade. What he said next sent shockwaves through the gallery, leaving jurors and spectators alike stunned into silence.
People were starting to say it's an East Coast, West Coast rivalry because it was people that's trying to make money. It was true people trying to make careers. It was people trying to get famous.
With the weight of his own infamous past looming large, Suge Knight pointed the finger directly at his longtime rival, accusing Diddy of being the mastermind behind one of the most notorious events in modern culture, the 1996 Las Vegas incident involving Shakur. It wasn't just a passing allegation. It was a direct, unflinching claim that Diddy had orchestrated a sinister plot, complete with financial incentives, to eliminate Shakur. Knight's words were laced with venom, his voice carrying decades of resentment from the infamous East Coast versus West Coast feud. The courtroom, already brimming with tension from Diddy's other legal battles, became a stage for a drama that seemed too surreal to be true.
Yes. He hated every bit of it. I remember one time, he was like, who did you grow up listening to? I'm like, Tupac. I ain't mentioned Biggie. That nigga ain't even talk to me for like 4 days after that. Everything with Pac, like, you couldn't say Pac was anything better than Biggie.
Imagine the scene. Diddy, usually the picture of confidence, seated at the defense table, his face a storm of conflicting emotions, disbelief, rage, and a flicker of something that could only be described as fear. His legal team, visibly flustered, scrambled to object, but the damage was already done. As Knight delivered his damning accusations, the atmosphere in the courtroom shifted. You could almost feel the weight of history pressing down on everyone present. This wasn't just a trial anymore, it was the unearthing of ghosts that had haunted the music industry for nearly 3 decades. Suge began by recounting the events of the mid-1000s, 990s, a time when the rivalry between Death Row Records and Bad Boy Entertainment had escalated from mere diss tracks to something far darker. He painted a vivid picture of the animosity that had consumed the industry, describing Diddy as a man driven by ambition and an insatiable hunger for dominance. Knight alleged that Diddy's envy of Shakur's meteoric rise and his own humiliation in the public eye fueled a desperation that led him to take drastic measures. It was a rivalry so bitter, so deeply personal, that Knight claimed it could only end in one way.
PD named Diddy 77 times in court documents related to Tupac's.
The courtroom hung on Knight's every word as he described the whispers on the streets at the time. Rumors of a bounty, a staggering offer made to ensure Shakur was removed from the equation permanently. Knight leaned into the camera, his eyes narrowing with a mix of disdain and righteous fury, as he declared that Diddy had offered substantial sums to orchestrate what he chillingly referred to as the ultimate solution. The prosecutor, no doubt aware of the dramatic weight of this testimony, pressed Knight further, asking him to clarify the nature of these alleged financial arrangements. Knight didn't hesitate, doubling down on his claims with a confidence that suggested he had been waiting years for this moment.
Right now, Davis is fighting for bail ahead of his trial, which he has pleaded not.
According to Knight, the animosity between the two camps had reached a boiling point in the months leading up to the infamous night in Las Vegas. He described a toxic atmosphere of mistrust and mounting threats, with Diddy allegedly pulling the strings from behind the scenes. What made Knight's testimony even more shocking was the level of detail he provided. He claimed to have received information from credible sources within the industry, individuals whose names he ominously refused to disclose, citing ongoing fears for their safety. These sources, Knight alleged, had warned him about Diddy's intentions long before the tragic events unfolded, painting a picture of a man willing to go to any lengths to protect his empire. As Knight spoke, the courtroom was electric with tension. Reporters furiously typed notes, their faces betraying a mix of disbelief and fascination. Jurors shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their eyes darting between the screen and the defendant. Diddy, for his part, appeared increasingly agitated. At one point, he leaned over to whisper something to his attorney, his expression dark with frustration. It was a far cry from the polished, untouchable persona he had cultivated over the years. This was not the Diddy of red carpets. This was a man cornered, his legacy under siege.
I'm not the guy who's here for
Puffy's downfall. But I am the guy who supports the victims who got victimized.
What made the testimony even more damning was Knight's assertion that the official investigations into these events had been deliberately mishandled. He insinuated that powerful figures, both in the music industry and beyond, had worked to ensure the truth was buried, protecting Diddy and his associates from facing any real consequences. Knight's words carried the weight of someone who had seen it all, someone who had lived through the darkest chapters of an industry built on power, wealth, and influence. He described a culture of silence where loyalty was enforced through fear and where those who dared to speak out often found themselves silenced in more ways than one.
We are not done and that Combs did not do this alone. Do you foresee that there could be other charges related to this case?
I'm not taking anything off the table.
The prosecutor then asked Knight about the infamous East Coast versus West Coast feud, framing it as a backdrop to the allegations. Knight didn't hold back, describing the rivalry as a war that was as much about personal vendettas as it was about business. He painted Diddy as a man consumed by jealousy, someone who couldn't stand to see Shakur and Death Row thrive while his own empire faltered under the weight of bad press and declining credibility. Knight's testimony suggested that for Diddy, the stakes were more than just financial. They were existential. He needed to eliminate the threat, not just to his business, but to his very identity as a kingpin of the industry. As the prosecutor pressed on, Knight revealed even more chilling details. He described how certain individuals allegedly connected to Diddy's inner circle had been spotted in Las Vegas on the night in question, their presence raising questions about whether they were there to observe, or worse, to ensure the plan was carried out. Knight stopped short of naming names, but the implication was clear. This was no random act of violence. It was, in his words, a calculated move orchestrated by someone with both the means and the motive to pull it off.
It's a question of that, but when you read through the indictment, it's pretty clear who could be indicted as a co-conspirator. Right now, there are people in the indictment who would be considered unnamed co-conspirators, but clearly have played a role in this conspiracy. And I think prosecutors have some big leverage on them because they're hoping that they testify against Diddy as prosecution witnesses.
By the time Knight's testimony concluded, the courtroom felt like it had been hit by a freight train. The sheer audacity of the allegations, combined with Knight's unflinching delivery, left no room for doubt about the gravity of the claims. Regardless of whether the jury believed him, one thing was certain: the trial had taken a turn that no one could have anticipated. The question now wasn't just about Diddy's guilt or innocence in the current charges. It was about whether this trial would finally bring to light the secrets that had been buried for so long. And as the courtroom buzzed with murmurs and speculation, it became clear that this was only the beginning.
This is very significant, just from who we associate Diddy being and everything we've seen him do over the decades. Like you said, this is quite the downfall to go from, we saw the mansions back in March that were raided by the feds. So to go from living in those mansions to being in a jail cell right now, I think it really underscores the magnitude of what he's facing and the weight of the federal government.
And just like that, the courtroom had become a time machine, dragging everyone back to the blood-soaked battleground of the 1990s music industry. But here's the thing, this wasn't just nostalgia for a feud that shaped hip-hop culture. This wasn't a throwback to a simpler time when rivalries were confined to diss tracks and flashy magazine covers. No, this was a reckoning. Suge Knight's accusations weren't just about rehashing old beefs. They were about dismantling the carefully constructed image of a man who had spent decades cultivating untouchable status. Diddy wasn't just a mogul in this narrative anymore. He was being painted as the puppet master of one of the darkest chapters in entertainment history, and the implications were staggering. As the courtroom buzzed in the aftermath of Knight's bombshell testimony, it became clear that this wasn't just a trial about the charges Diddy was currently facing. This was an excavation of everything the public had been told, or rather, sold, about the East Coast-West Coast rivalry. And what made it all the more chilling was the way Knight framed it as a calculated power play. He wasn't just accusing Diddy of being involved in one event. He was suggesting that Diddy's entire empire was built on a foundation of fear, manipulation, and ruthless ambition.
Hey, real quickly, all that commissary stuff, he's not getting any of that because people in the shoe have an abbreviated list. So he's out of luck. No stake for him. Yeah, he is on watch. This guy thought he would have went home. All of a sudden, he didn't get bond. Remember, the first night that he was there.
The prosecution, clearly emboldened by Knight's testimony, wasted no time in weaving it into their larger narrative. They painted a picture of Diddy as a man who thrived in the chaos, someone who didn't just survive the violent atmosphere of the 1990s rap scene, but weaponized it to climb to the top. They suggested that the same strategies allegedly used to dominate rivals like Suge Knight and Shakur were later adapted for other forms of control in his personal and professional life. The jury was being asked to see a pattern, a chilling through line that connected the past to the present.
Got it. So you're saying Diddy's an FBI informant, and he's been one for many years.
That's what they say. Nothing never happens, but it's still, like I said, angel.
And the details, they only got darker. Witnesses began to emerge, some with direct ties to the music industry, others with connections to the streets, each adding another layer to the story. One former associate of Diddy's took the stand and described a culture of paranoia that had allegedly surrounded him for years. According to this witness, loyalty in Diddy's world wasn't optional, it was mandatory. And those who dared to question his authority, let's just say they didn't stick around long enough to ask twice. The prosecution leaned heavily on this testimony, using it to suggest that the alleged plots against rivals like Shakur weren't isolated incidents, but part of a larger pattern of control and retaliation. Then there were the whispers of secret meetings, the kind of backroom dealings that sounded more like the plot of a gangster film than the inner workings of a record label. One particularly damning claim involved a meeting between Diddy and a group of East Coast figures with questionable reputations. The purpose of the meeting? According to the source, it was to strategize how to maintain dominance in the face of rising West Coast competition. And while no one directly implicated Diddy in anything specific during that meeting, the prosecution made sure to highlight the timing, just weeks before the infamous events in Las Vegas.
Why they ain't gonna let Puffy out is because they trying to connect that Keefe situation with Puffy. That's what I really think it is. Because if it came down to some sex trafficking, foolishness, and all that, there are a buku chumped up charges they couldn't prove. I don't think they got no evidence. I think they trying to keep him in there to lock in that Keefe. You heard me? That Keefe situation with Puff. I think that's the only reason why he's still in jail right now.
But let's not forget the elephant in the room, the money. Knight's testimony had introduced the idea of a financial incentive, a bounty that had allegedly been placed on Shakur and Suge Knight. And while the defense worked overtime to dismiss this as hearsay, the prosecution countered with a series of financial records that they claimed showed unusual transactions around the same time. Large sums moving between shell companies, unexplained withdrawals, all of it was presented as circumstantial evidence that something bigger was at play. The defense, of course, argued that these were routine business dealings, but the damage had already been done. The jury didn't need hard proof to start connecting the dots in their minds.
Those individuals allegedly included high-ranking supervisors in the business, personal assistants, security staff, and household staff.
And just when it seemed like the tension couldn't get any thicker, the prosecution dropped another bombshell. They brought in a former security consultant who had worked for Bad Boy Entertainment during its peak years. This individual, whose identity was kept anonymous for their safety, testified about a culture of intimidation within the organization. They described a world where power was maintained through fear, where employees were allegedly instructed to look the other way when certain business matters were discussed. The consultant claimed that they had overheard conversations suggesting that big moves were being planned to deal with the escalating rivalry between East and West. While they couldn't provide specifics, the implication was clear. These weren't moves being made on a chessboard.
A U.S. judge has ruled that the rapper and producer Sean Diddy Combs will stand trial on federal trafficking and racketeering charges in May. He'll be held in prison until then. Sean Combs has pleaded not guilty to charges that he used his business empire to transport women and male workers across state lines to take part in recorded performances. If convicted, he could face a life sentence.
The defense, for their part, did everything they could to discredit these witnesses. They pointed out inconsistencies, questioned motives, and painted each one as someone with an agenda, either to settle old scores or to grab a moment in the spotlight. And to some extent, they succeeded in sowing doubt. But the problem for Diddy's team wasn't the credibility of any one witness. It was the sheer volume of them. Each new testimony was like a puzzle piece being dropped onto the table. And while the picture wasn't complete, it was getting harder and harder to ignore what was taking shape.
We are not done. This investigation is ongoing, and I encourage anyone with information about this case to come forward.
And then came the recordings. Yes, recordings. The prosecution unveiled a series of audio clips that they claimed were obtained from a former associate of Diddy's who had secretly recorded conversations over the years. While the defense immediately objected to the admissibility of these clips, the judge allowed portions to be played for the jury. The first clip was relatively innocuous, a conversation about business strategy. But as the recordings continued, the tone shifted. There were veiled threats, cryptic references to taking care of problems, and one particularly chilling moment where a voice, allegedly Diddy's, could be heard saying, "Sometimes you gotta make sacrifices to stay on top." The defense argued that these statements were being taken out of context, but the damage was done. The jury had heard them, and no amount of spin could erase those words from their minds. By this point, the courtroom felt less like a place of law and more like a theater of the macabre, each new revelation adding another layer of darkness to an already grim story. Reporters outside the courthouse described a media frenzy unlike anything they'd seen in years, with fans, critics, and conspiracy theorists all descending on the trial in a desperate bid to catch a glimpse of the drama. Social media was ablaze with speculation, every new detail dissected and debated by an audience that seemed equal parts horrified and enthralled.
Understand that he has a shrink coming by his cell to see him several times a day. And now there's talk about putting him in, it's like a bubble. It's like a cell that has like a plexiglass wall in it where they have inmates watching you. That's actually their job, to keep an eye on the inmates that are on watch.
And yet, for all the noise and chaos, one question loomed larger than the rest. What if it's true? What if everything Suge Knight alleged, everything the witnesses claimed, everything the prosecution argued, what if it all pointed to a truth that had been hiding in plain sight for decades? What if the man who had built an empire on the image of success and celebration had done so by walking over the wreckage of anyone who stood in his way?
And ain't no other way they gonna keep you in there of, yeah, oh, Diddy did this to me. Oh, Diddy did that to me. I'm suing him. Oh, we got enough evidence to... No, you don't. That's accusations. That's not factual, brother. You dig? So I feel like the actual factual thing that they're really trying to aim for is the keefe.
But here's the kicker. This story isn't over. Not by a long shot. If anything, it's just getting started. With each passing day, the trial digs deeper into the shadows, unearthing secrets that many believed would never see the light of day. And as the walls continue to close in, one thing is clear. The truth, whatever it may be, is a far more complex and dangerous thing than anyone could have imagined. So where does that leave us? Let us know what you think down below, because this isn't just a trial, this is history in the making, and trust me, you're gonna wanna stay tuned for what happens next. See you in the next one.